Doctors with disabilities exist in small but impactful numbers. How do they navigate their journey? What are the challenges? What are the benefits to patients and to their peers? And what can we learn from their experiences? Join us as we explore the stories of doctors, PAs, nurses, OTs, PTs, pharmacists, dentists, and other health professionals with disabilities. We'll also be interviewing the researchers and policymakers that drive medicine forward towards real equity and inclusion. I am Peter Poullos, and I am thrilled to bring you the Docs with Disabilities podcast.
Greetings! We are delighted to have you back on the Docs with Disabilities podcast. Today's episode holds a special significance as we pay tribute to the extraordinary life of the late Dr. Brooke Ellison, a luminary in various roles. As a person, scholar, author, sociologist, professor, and leader, Dr. Ellison left an indelible mark. We are honored to have had the opportunity to interview her before she passed away on February 4th, 2024. In her captivating TEDx speech at Stony Brook University titled, "The Pillars of Hope," Dr. Ellison transcended the confines of paralysis, both physical, following an accident at the age of 11, and metaphorical, overcoming the human emotions of fear. Through hope, resilience, strength, and empowerment, she achieved remarkable milestones. A Harvard University graduate, co-navigating her academic journey with her devoted mother, Dr. Ellison authored impactful books, such as Miracles Happen and Look Both Ways. Her life story found cinematic expression in Christopher Reeve's film, The Brooke Ellison Story. Notably, she served as an associate professor of health policy and medical ethics at Stony Brook University, specializing in stem cell research. A strong advocate and leader within the disability community, Dr. Ellison infused her passions for policy, structural change, inclusion, and ethics into her role on the Empire State Stem Cell Board. Additionally, she ventured into politics and ran for the New York State Senate in 2006. Please join us in commemorating and celebrating Dr. Ellison's contributions to the disability community in this special podcast episode, where Dr. Poullos initiates a heartfelt discussion with Dr. Ellison, exploring her memoir, Look Both Ways, and sharing his personal connection to her narrative through his experiences with quadriplegia. Though Dr. Ellison has passed away, this conversation endures as a testament to her resilience, strength, and the enduring impact of a life well lived. We hope that through this podcast interview, the story of Dr. Ellison stays alive, present in our minds, and as a source of support and encouragement for people with disabilities who aspire to enter STEM.
We have a lot in common, and just so many things that you've written and talked about just resonate with me so much. And now, after reading your book, I realize that I don't have to write a book because you wrote it.
That is like the pinnacle of the compliment. Holy mackerel!
You wrote it for me. I mean, it's so funny. Phil gifted me your book. Probably when it first came out 2 years ago, they're like, you have to read this book. But it's been sitting on my nightstand unread until I started getting ready to interview you. And I'm like, oh, no wonder they gave this to me years ago. It's like just right up my alley, and it's so inspirational. I know that word is complicated. We've talked about that, the inspiration porn, but I mean, it's really more validating than anything, and just I thank you for writing it.
Oh my gosh! Well, I can't think of a better compliment than that. My gosh, yeah, to know that it resonates deeply with people, and that I was so, as I mentioned in the book, I struggled with this tension between writing something that was either autobiographical or particular to disability or something more universal than that, and I didn't know where the right balance was to strike. So the fact that that was the case for you means so much to me, and
The
Thank
book
you.
is for everyone. There's something for everyone in there, from the person who doesn't know anything about disability to
Thank
the
you.
person who's an expert. And the way you explain things, the the thought that you've done, that you've put into the work that you've put into understanding this field, really comes out, and you break down concepts so well for people.
After the lovely introduction of Dr. Ellison's powerful book, Dr. Poullos then asked Dr. Ellison to explain the meaning behind the book's title, Look Both Ways.
Well, so I started writing the actual text of this book, I would say probably 7 years ago. I had started with just an essay, just a personal reflection essay that actually is nestled in chapter 4 of the book, the I Want section. For those of you who haven't read it yet, there's a deeply personal part of the book where I talk about the things that I want in my life versus the things that I need in my life. And after I wrote that, so that could exist as a standalone thing, or it could be incorporated in the book as it was. But after I wrote that, I knew that the book that was going to come out of it, or I guess contextualize that piece, would be a heavy book. It would be a weighty book with a lot of emotion to it, a lot of personal struggle and tension and emotion behind it. And I wanted a title that was going to capture that. And I thought about it, and I thought about different options, and nothing really felt right. And it was just one day, just in conversation. I have nephews, 5 nephews, and the book is dedicated to them. And 2 of them live right down the street from me. And we're walking them home. I was walking them home to go back to home after I visit. And I said, look both ways. You have to look both ways. And then, as they were coming out of the driveway, and when I said that, I said, wait a second, what? An appropriate title for what I want to do, right? Not only is it emblematic or representative of this central event in my life, right? The kind of guidance or instruction you're given as a child to prevent an injury like mine, right? Prevent children or adults from getting hit by a car, but it's such an important set of instructions for how to live your life, right? That you can't just live your life viewing it in one direction because you fail to see everything else that surrounds it, right? And I think the tendency is, especially if you've had trauma in your life, to often fixate on that trauma and the difficulty that comes out of it. And when you do that, you fail to see all the beauty that trauma creates, the sense of strength and resilience that trauma can generate. And that's how I have chosen to live my life. That I could have dwelled purely on the trauma and the sadness and the difficulty, but that would be a completely unfair representation of a much richer life. So I thought, that's what I want to say. That's what I want to say. So the title both was a reflection of what I wanted to write, then also reflected it.
It's a very smart title.
Thank you. Thank you. I know it's a ballsy title, right? Like when I first told people that was what I was gonna name my book, they got emotional. They got a little bit choked up. But actually, I had posted it on Facebook, and interestingly, I have a lot of friends who I'm connected with, and always interact with me all that much. Friends from when I was like a little tyke who, after my accident, didn't feel quite so comfortable continuing to engage with me, didn't know how to interact with me, didn't feel like they could contribute to my life, I could contribute to theirs. And when they read about my book, when they read about the title of my book, they reached out to me and said, wow, this is something I'm going to know more about. This makes me feel sad that I didn't remain in contact with you. This is such a powerful title. When I read it, I got the chills. Actually, one friend had mentioned to me, and that was what I was hoping for. A title that would be as powerful and as deep in meaning as what I hoped the book would be.
In the following section, Dr. Ellison and Dr. Poullos explore the last chapter of the book, Look Both Ways, titled A Lesson. This chapter resonated deeply with Dr. Poullos as he and Dr. Ellison discuss the lessons and resilience that can arise as a result of disability.
The last chapter of your book, I think, ties in really well. It's something that we've alluded to, the power of disability. And the last chapter of your book is called A Lesson. The lesson, do you mind if I read a few
No,
sentences?
absolutely not.
Okay. It says, we do not need pain to be deeper people. And depth of character is certainly not the definitive outcome of having undergone pain, but it can be. And that is perhaps the biggest lesson I've learned in my life, and perhaps the biggest accomplishment over which I can claim credit. Pain and struggle do not prescribe any particular outcome, neither one of deeper understanding nor less understanding, but either is equally possible despite what we are told is probable, individually and when we are fortunate enough together. We have many of the virtues we need to withstand more than we might ever think we could, to fight back when we feel like all is lost, to find meaning and purpose when we think there is none, to care longer and more intensely than we ever thought was possible, to take on odds stacked strongly against us, and to find ourselves still standing in whatever way we can on the other side. I cannot think of a more valuable lesson than that. That is extremely poignant.
Thank you. Thank
Can
you.
you
That last chapter, it was the last chapter that I wrote. I didn't necessarily write the book sequentially, but that was, for the most part, I did, with the exception of that section that I referred to before. But that last chapter, I wanted to make sure I got right. So I wrote the entire book over the course of 3 months. Actually, just the 3 months that the summer of 2019. Like, I made some edits and tinkered around with it and the language here and there for a little bit, but the entirety of the text was written those 3 months, and that section, that last chapter, probably took me the longest amount of time. So I'd say a week to try to get right. And I remember not struggling with that sentence, but like really being intentional about that sentence. I wanted to make sure that I was very clear about what I was trying to say. I didn't want to take some kind of like experiential superiority stance, right? That just because I had this trauma, that now I am a sage and have more knowledge and wisdom about life than anybody else does, and because of the accident that I confronted and some of the pain and struggle that I've had since that time, that it necessarily generated outcome X, right? There wasn't this one-to-one correlation of experiencing trauma and having a specific outcome, or greater awareness or less awareness about the state of the world. But it took work. It took an understanding that we're all strong. We all have sources of pain and sources of struggle, but the capacity of the human spirit is such that we can derive greater understanding because of those circumstances. We can become better able to understand other people's struggles. We can develop an epistemology of trauma and difficulty that generates deep wells of resilience that you could draw upon, sources of strength, sources of hope and problem solving that are critical to living your life and trying to effectuate change in the world. And like, that is possible. It's not a certainty, but it's possible. And when we've experienced trauma and difficulty, sometimes it's hard to realize that is actually an outcome. And it's so hard to realize because we're not taught that that's a possibility, right? Like, I think, particularly in the healthcare space, that message is not given nearly often enough to people who have either been diagnosed with life-changing diagnoses or experienced life-changing accidents or changes in their lives. That message of continued purpose in life, I think, is not given nearly often enough, because I think a lot of disability, and I'm sure we'll get into this in greater detail, is couched in the medical model, right? In that disability is some kind of medical failure or source of weakness or some kind of inferior version of another life that would have been lived were it not for the disability in and of itself. And I think that is really unfortunate messaging. I think that is a responsibility that everybody in the medical field has to try to help change, right? That just because you've experienced some kind of difficulty, some kind of trauma, some kind of life-altering situation, that doesn't mean that your life is over, and that doesn't mean that all the sources of opportunity to continue to effectuate the world and make a difference and have some purpose and develop the skill set that are the basics of leadership and heroism. Unless that message is shared, people are not aware of it.
Now, there's two things I want to say about that and ask about that. One is that you, like me, early on, after your injury, wanted nothing to do with disability,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Yes.
But you found, and this is something that resonates with me. It seems like you found your power by leaning into disability,
Mm-hmm.
right? By like,
Exactly 33 years ago, as of just a couple of weeks ago. So a long time ago, and I was in the hospital in intensive care for 6 weeks, and then rehabilitation for 7.5 months. And I think that we all know that rehabilitation is a particular mindset, right? It's a particular way of looking at how to address changes in people's lives from like a "you need to be fixed" standpoint. And of course, like, that is what many people want. That is certainly what I want. And I'd say probably 99.9% of people who have undergone life, like, disabling accidents want, right? And I would never question that, right? That is what medicine is for. You to fix that kind of injury and to restore people to the maximal state of wellness and health, right? So that is the purpose of rehabilitation as a part of that. But I think also kind of underlying a bit of rehabilitation is this mindset that disability is wrong, right? Disability, to live with a disability, is to be chronically unwell, right? Irrespective of the comorbidities and healthcare challenges that people with disabilities face, which they exist, right? I'm not going to deny that. I'm certainly a product of that. I know that full well. But to live with a disability in and of itself is not purely a medical issue. It's not purely a physical issue. It's it is couched or surrounded by social factors that are also part of how we should understand disability. But the rehabilitation mindset, I think belies that and teaches people, I think, far too frequently that their lives are lesser. Their lives are inferior, not quite right, or the world is not necessarily designed for you. So that kind of deeply infiltrated my thoughts immediately after I was discharged from the hospital. So I entered the world after rehabilitation almost with that assumption that I wanted people to like pretend that my disability didn't exist, right? Don't look at the wheelchair. That doesn't exist. That's not who I am. I'm just the person I always was, right? Don't look at that. Any kind of accommodation that was made for me, I was, overly uh apologetic, number one, of having the change to have to be made, and overly appreciative for the change having to be made in the first place, right? So like all of these ideas were being kind of inculcated into my thinking. I remember when I was trying to return to school, so I missed the entire 7th grade year. After my accident, I was in the hospital for 9 months, from September of 1990 till May of 1991. And so I when I returned home from the hospital, I made up that academic year over the summer and was fighting as hard as I could to return to school that following September. And I was told things like my presence in the classroom was going to be disruptive, and it was going to be disturbing to the other kids, upsetting to the other kids. Right, so all of these ideas were like infiltrating my thinking in really detrimental ways. And for a very long time, like, why would I want to be associated with that? Why would I want to be associated with something that I was led to believe, and I think a lot of society felt, was weakness and was social or societal detriment, and people who were unproductive, people who were scary. Like, I didn't want that for me. So for a very long time, I think for a detrimentally long time, I didn't want to be associated with disability at all. Like, so much so that when I was in college and in graduate school, like, I didn't want to study anything that had to do with disability. I didn't want to join any clubs or anything that was associated with disability, because I felt like that was aligning myself with an idea that I didn't want to be associated with. And it wasn't until I was in graduate school, when I was at the Harvard Kennedy School and taking a class on leadership. And it was this class, and I write about it, extensively in the book. Like, this was a pivotal, life-changing course for me, where I finally started to see that I actually had a valuable contribution to make to the world, and that who I was, because of my disability and because of who I was, it was actually a stronger individual, a more compassionate individual, a wiser individual, somebody who could see the world from different vantage points I never would have had the opportunity to see before. Like, all of this helped me to understand my own worth, but then the worth also of others with disabilities, who live their lives in the same way, who live their lives with the same epistemology of disability, the same skill set that comes out after living with a disability, one of strength and resilience and fortitude, and all of the things that I think are really valuable. So that understanding was so central to how I've continued to live my life, right? Like, you hear the phrase, nobody's gonna love you till you love yourself, right? Like, I didn't really ever see that as, a powerful piece of advice for me, but it's true, right? Like, until I could understand my own worth and then turn that around so that other people could try to understand it as well, like, I was missing the boat completely. I was missing how I could be contributory to how society functions, what change I could help to effectuate in how society operates. Like, and I feel so privileged now to be able to share kind of the depth of my experience and, the enormity of the things that I've undergone in a way that doesn't make me feel like I'm a weaker person, doesn't make me want to run in the other direction, but actually allows me to talk about things that I didn't even dreamed of.
Dr. Ellison's narrative, as eloquently recounted, found its cinematic expression in The Brooke Ellison Story, a film produced by Christopher Reeve, himself a quadriplegic. Join us as Dr. Meeks delves into the cinematic exploration of medicine's constrictive perspective on life for individuals navigating disability.
I did watch the movie, and I noted in there, I wonder how much it aligned with kind of the actual story, right? And what's created for cinema. But in there, it seems like the first kind of message that went out to you about your value and what you could do was from the medical providers. So not your parents. Your parents were ready to bring you home and go back to school and all of that. But it was really the individuals in the rehab center that were trying to change your parents' perceptions of what you were capable of doing, kind of trying to set a bar. Would you say that's accurate?
Yeah. I guess what's important to note, like in any film, sometimes characters become composite characters of a lot of different ideas, right? So people who represent less an individual and more an idea that needs to be conveyed, right? So I think that was kind of how certain characters in the Brooke Ellison story were created. I think some of the physicians and nurses in the rehabilitation hospital were that, right? So kind of mouthpieces for ideas that needed to be conveyed. But that said, there were certainly physicians, certainly members of the healthcare profession who were giving me and my parents that very kind of message. So it was represented in the film. When I first got to the rehabilitation hospital, the first thing that was asked of my parents was whether or not I was there for long-term care. And like I think that nobody really even had a sense of what they even meant by that. Like it was so out of our realm of understanding, like that I could possibly be kept in, in essentially a nursing facility for until I died. Like
Yeah.
that was beyond it what anybody was thinking or willing to accept from my life. So like that was question number one. And then I think for many children who were in the hospital with me, familial support was simply not there, right? So the children had different disabilities. They were affected by injury in different ways, and they didn't necessarily have the familial or community support needed to move from the hospital back home or to live their lives as richly as they may have wanted. And I think that was the expectation that was put on my life and probably kids' lives across the board. Like when you see that over and over and over again, that becomes the assumption that you make for everybody, and for understandable reasons, right or wrong. And I think that that's for understandable reasons. And that was kind of how my life was both valued and predicted to unfold. Surely nobody who had treated me at the time of my accident, or even for the the months, even years after my accident, could have foreseen how my life would have unfolded. Right? Like, I think again, unfortunately, my life is a bit unique and rare in terms of the opportunities that have been afforded to me and the kinds of things I've been able to take advantage of. Like it is far too rare. But it's rare. So I think that is the kind of thing, or the life that I've lived is not the life that's often seen or thought of when people think about people with disabilities. There was little in the way of kind of role modelship for other people to think about and point me in the direction of, for me to have greater expectations of my life than what they were telling me and the experiences that they had had. So it took a lot of resilience and kind of a lot of self-awareness for me and my family to believe that what they were telling me was not the definitive as far as what my life was going to be like. And it was hard. It's hard to combat, number one, the difficulties that we're all facing, kind of the adjustments to a vastly different way of life, and then also this kind of negative messaging that we were on the receiving end of, right? Telling me and telling my family, this is only going to be difficult, right? This is going to be way more difficult than you're able to continue to fight against. So the room that I'm in right now, this room was, it's my office, my home office right now. But when this was a room that was added on to my home when I was in rehabilitation, and it is flooded with light. So this above me, there's four skylights, and then around me, there's all these sliding glass doors and windows. It was built for the express purpose because my parents were told that I was probably not going to be able to leave the house, even go outside. So my parents wanted to make sure that I had a room that I could, sit in or be in, and it would mimic or be a proxy for being outside. And this is what they came up with. Fortunately, that expectation didn't come to pass, and like I am out and about and as deeply immersed in my community as I possibly can be. But that was a real fear. That was a real, a real prediction and sense of worry for my parents that my life was just going to be one of complete inopportunity and being shut in.
Yeah, well, that was my worry too after my accident. And luckily, and I wonder how much of this had to do with the timing.
Yeah.
That 1990 was when the ADA was passed, and I got hurt in 2003,
Hmm.
and so maybe there was 13 years of people like entering the educational system and accomplishing things and sort of maybe illustrating that things were possible. I think so much of this also boils down to like personal context. And one of my PM&R doctors in the hospital knew of a doctor with a spinal cord injury that worked nearby. And I was
Wow,
at
like it's
Santa
so critical, so
and
important.
he came to visit me in the hospital and he talked to me and he was a C5-6 quad and he's like told me what he could do and how
Really?
he did it and it was just so inspiring just to know that it had been done before and I used him as an example when talking to other people. I still use him as an example,
That,
you
that
know.
is phenomenal. Like, and we need so much more of that, right? We need people with disabilities, people who have experienced spinal cord injury or other kinds of life changing disabilities in every leadership circle for that reason, right? So it's not predicted or expected that after a disability, your life is going to be one of an opportunity, right? It should be as expected as seeing anybody else without a disability to be in, in a C-suite or to be in a decision-making body or in some kind of leadership position, right? Because that's just what we expect of everyone, right? That level of opportunity should be what we expect of everyone, not just the presumption that your life is over and you're just going to sit in front of a television for the rest of your life. Like, I think that is a very unfair and very unfortunate uh, presumption or prediction to put on anybody's life.
You talk about in your book at being one time like revered or thought of as like inspirational and on the other hand looked down upon or have these negative stereotypes.
It's such a strange dichotomous perception of disability, right? It's like apotheosis, right? Like these people are godlike, but at the same time, let's pity them, right? It's like as long as I don't have to live that situation myself, I can feel any extreme emotion about them, right? Is one of like of heroism, like I mentioned before, one of that these people are the bottom of the barrel. Sometimes the same as like within the same person, right? Holding these both kind of bizarrely contradictory beliefs, and like I think that also is very detrimental messaging to give to somebody who's recently injured, right? That you either need to be, this grandiose figure or you're going to be nothing, right? And to talk about people who don't have any choice but to to stay at home collecting a disability check, right? Like there are lots of social reasons and physical reasons why people make that choice that it are so difficult to talk about and are not really thought about and are looked at as sources of weakness rather than, well, maybe we have some social fixing to do in order to make it more possible for people to work and make them feel like they're more there's stronger parts of how society operates. Like all of those things I think are unfortunate if they're discussed in the wrong way.
You said in your book, and this relates back to talking about doctors, and maybe you're referring to doctors here, maybe not. Some of the most astounding ignorance can come from people with more letters after their names than in them. Who might you be talking about
Oh,
there?
wow. Right, so I want to just say that clearly, and I have a tremendous debt of gratitude to the medical profession. That said, I think there is a level of misunderstanding and ignorance when it comes to what disability is all about, what people who live their lives with disability are capable of doing. even people, so when I was in the hospital, when I was in rehabilitation, there were children there with me who had sustained significant traumatic brain injuries, right, and weren't engaging in ways that they had in the past, right? So would speak with slurred speech and not communicate in the same way, but had deep insights into humanity and say things that were powerful and meaningful and like brazenly insightful, and like that's real. There's nothing less real about that experience. There's nothing less valuable about that experience and insights into the world than anybody else's, irrespective of how much education you have under your belt, right? Irrespective of how many class hours in the lecture halls and tests you've taken, right? So I'm sitting here in front of all of these diplomas and degrees and whatever, but that's not necessarily it's not because of those degrees that I am who I am right now. Like, I don't think that some of my understandings of the world and about humanity came from sitting in the classroom and, things that I was taught out of a textbook. It comes out of experience, it comes out of connecting to human beings on a deeper level than I think we often allow ourselves or give ourselves permission to do.
In this next section, Dr. Ellison discusses how we can be better in the medical field about how we treat our patients with disabilities and chronic illness.
Well, I think it's important to really learn from people who live with disabilities and chronic illness themselves, right? To take the time to have that level of humility to say, wait a second, it would be valuable to learn from somebody who's living on a ventilator what it feels like to live on a ventilator. Maybe it's valuable to gain insights from wheelchair users about what is possible while using a wheelchair, where the sources of frustration and the biggest impediments actually lie. Like, is it within oneself? Is it within a society that doesn't welcome wheelchairs as frequently as it should? I think it takes some humility and it takes some willingness to say, I don't actually have all the answers, especially on things that I think that I do, like, issues related to the human body. Maybe I need to get some better understanding from people who have lived experience before I say what is possible and what isn't. Like, I think that is that is step number one, priority numero uno when it comes to doing better, is to actually learn and to get more people with disabilities into the healthcare field, right? So having people who have that lived experience and that personal knowledge helping to guide the lives of those who are possibly new to this situation, new to disability, trying to navigate circumstances that are different from anything I'd ever experienced before. Like, that is where I think the most invaluable opportunities lie.
That's what Lisa and I are all about. We're trying to change this from the inside, and disabled people are the key to changing medicine. We're the people who are working on making it more inclusive.
Yeah.
And so thank you for that.
No, of course. Like, I mean, the mantra, nothing about us without us, applies to so many different things, right? Or nothing without us, right? Applies to, not just the intricacies of policymaking, but everything, right? And I think it would be foolhardy to assume that we can create or envision expectations for other people's lives when we don't have an understanding of what those lives are actually like. And I think that was where medicine and the healthcare professions would really do well, is to better understand that, especially if they're going to give prognoses about what people's lives are going to be like.
Part of any organized initiatives right now, either small or large, to work on this, to improve the diversity of medical schools as it pertains to disability, or improve the training of physicians on how to care for us?
Yeah, I'd say probably much to many of my friends' dismay, I would say yes to all of those things, right? So my friends are trying to tell me, like, you gotta slow your butt down, right? Like, so I understand that, but so yes, so I talk about this in, I guess, 3 or 4 different buckets. So the first, so in the work I do as a professor, right, I talk about this all the time, right? So I talk about, I'm training, so actually this semester in particular, I'm teaching 2 3-hour lecture courses on medical ethics, and my students are future healthcare professionals, right? So a lot of them are like out this week because they're taking the MCAT, right? So that there are students who are going into the healthcare professions, and I am very, very pointed in the way that I construct my lectures and my lessons, that how medical ethics has often been viewed, or the standpoint that medical ethics sometimes takes, is one of this medical model of disability, right? We're talking about the relative worth of people's lives and kind of how we triage care, or how we understand end of life decision making, or the value that we ascribe to a life that has recently undergone a life-changing diagnosis. Like, that comes out of the medical model, and we need to think about it differently. We need to better understand people's lives before we assume who ought to get care and who doesn't, is less deserving of care. How we understand questions related to physician aid in dying, and what that conversation means to people with disabilities, and to populations just in general. When we talk about genetics research, what that means for certain groups of people as opposed to others, right? Like, I'm very particular about making sure that the disability vantage point is well represented in these conversations. So, like, I could start with that, making sure that the students that I teach, who are future healthcare professionals, understand that. And I also do that for students coming into Stony Brook Medicine program. So I give a lecture every year to the in the transition to medical school kind of orientation, about disability and what disability means and how it is often represented in medicine, possibly not as accurately as it ought to be. So that's number one. In addition to my position as a professor, associate professor, I serve as vice president for tech and innovation for an organization called United Spinal Association. So it's Peter, I'm sure you've heard of it, right? So it's the biggest kind of community-driven organization around people with disabilities, and so I work tirelessly to share the message that I was basically just sharing about the worth and the value of the lives of people with disabilities, and how central that is, and how we as a society need to do a better job to make sure that people with disabilities have as much access and as much opportunity as everybody else, and that that level of access and opportunity comes from the kinds of policies that we enact, the kinds of technology that we innovate, the kinds of social supports we put into place. Like, all of these things either enable somebody or further disable somebody, and we as members of humanity better understand that we all have a role to play when it comes to disability, that it's not just some other population that we can either choose to be to care about or not, right? That it's really all of us, it's really everybody. And then thirdly, so I'm an active member of the Harvard Alumni Association, and I guess it was in May of 2020, the Harvard Alumni Association. Actually, several months before that, there was a group of members of the Harvard Alumni Association Executive Committee who wanted to start what they called the allyship series. So having speakers who represented, who could speak on behalf of marginalized communities, historically underrepresented communities, to talk about their experiences as alumni of Harvard, and just kind of what it's like to live, as a member of this group. And they had asked me to talk about disability. And so I did that in May of 2020. And out of that came the realization that there was never over what's called a shared interest group. So kind of a group of Harvard alumni who coalesce around a topical area. So there's a shared interest group on Harvard alumni in Hollywood and in law and Black alumni and that kind of thing. So all different interest groups. So there was never one created on disability because I guess largely a lot of alumni didn't think that disability was something you would want to associate with, right? So we realized that was a big problem. So over the course of the next couple of years, I worked with some other alumni to create this shared interest group, which we've entitled the Harvard Alumni Disability Alliance, which was just formally recognized by the Harvard Alumni Association in May of 2023. And this is exactly what we're looking to do, right? To help to change the conversation, not just in medicine, right? Because medicine is obviously a critical, I guess, on the front lines of how people understand themselves after experiencing a disabling injury or something. But really every social discipline, whether it's law or engineering or architecture, and how they all need to be inclusive of people with disabilities. So to really integrate disability into every conversation that we have, and so that people with disabilities are seen for the value that they contribute rather than presumptions of detriment that they cause, right? So I'm doing this in as many circles as I possibly can, and even just talking about my book and talking about my book in grand round settings or to medical schools in a more general sense. Like I'm trying to beat this drum in as many circles as I possibly can, because I feel like I have a level of responsibility to do that. Because of my life and how it's unfolded, I know that I've been given a lot of opportunity, and if I don't take it and don't approach that opportunity with the knowledge of how I can have the greatest impact, then I'm shortchanging myself. So I'm trying to do it as often as I possibly can, and this session today with you guys is one example, a really critical example.
Do you know Holly Tabor at Stanford? She's a
I don't think so. No, I don't.
Kevin Mintz also. He has cerebral palsy. He
Yes,
uses a
I do know him.
wheelchair.
Yeah.
You know Kevin. Yeah, he was at Harvard and now he's at Stanford. She and Kevin did a talk at our disability conference in April about ethics and disability. It was really good. You might find it interesting if you have spare time. To watch it.
I definitely would love that. There are not nearly as many voices in that space, in that intersection as there ought to be, right? Especially when so much of medical ethics talks directly about disability, right? Maybe not in so many words and in so many terms, but that's what they're talking about. And unless there are more voices from the disabled community in that conversation, then it's going to be presented, incorrectly.
I guess that's why Holly invited me to be on the ethics committee at Stanford.
Oh,
I didn't really understand. Yeah, no, I did. I am.
Oh, good.
Because she wanted a disabled voice.
Yeah.
Although honestly, I feel like I'm kind of superfluous because she and a few other people are so tuned into disability that I rarely even need to say anything.
No, the more the better. Really, the more the better.
Yeah. And I love how you take nothing about us without us a step further and say just nothing without us. It doesn't have to be about us.
Yeah.
Yeah, just we're always here. Yeah. I didn't understand this. I just really appreciate your point about how what you call a diametric opposition between ethics and disability, and your explanation from that. It's really interesting that they don't see eye to eye.
Yeah, and I think that's so unfortunate, right? Because they're talking about issues that are so critical to both fields, right? So medical ethics, you would assume that the position, on 9 out of 10 issues would be in alignment with the disability community, but that's very rarely the case. And I think for that same reason that so few thinkers who are leaders in the bioethical fields and the medical ethics fields don't necessarily have the lived experience. And that's not to, I don't want to, I mean, they're among the most brilliant and the wisest people, the most thoughtful people talking and giving a lot of attention to complex issues that nobody wants to have to think about, right? Like how we triage care. We just lived through this pandemic where these questions were actually brought to life, right? These, often thought of as philosophical or theoretical questions were actually brought to life, in our lifetime. Like nobody wants to be in the position to have to figure out who gets access to care and who doesn't when we're talking about limited resources. So that they're not enviable positions at all. But it's so important to have a quintessentially disabled perspective on these conversations because people with disabilities are so severely impacted by them. And when you assume that a disabled life is a life that is less meaningful or less purposeful or just less than everybody else's life, then the logical conclusions that get drawn from that assumption are pretty clear.
I was so relieved and surprised that the DOJ came out and made that statement right after some, I forget which state it was, somewhere in the South,
Yep.
put out a triage policy about people with severe disabilities not receiving ventilators
It was
if they were
horrifying.
scared. Yeah.
It
And
was
then the
horrifying.
DOJ sent out a memo and said, actually, you're not allowed to do that.
Yeah, but like that is like such a devastatingly brilliant example of exactly what we're talking about, right? And when that idea and when that mentality is so deeply embedded in how we think, then these are the kinds of policies that are going to get created. And I remember being so terrified at the beginning of the pandemic for that reason. I was actually right before the pandemic, in January, early January of 2020, I was in the hospital. I was getting a fairly routine kidney stone procedure done, and I went into septic shock. So I was in the hospital, clinging to life, right, on pressors, on all sorts of exotic and elaborate medical interventions to save my life. And I was discharged from the hospital from the SICU in, I guess, January 22nd of 2020, only to come home to the pandemic. And I remember just being terrified. Like I still was not well, right? Like I was not septic anymore, but certainly not well. And I remember being terrified. Like if I had to go to the hospital to get something addressed that I had just experienced, what would I do? Like, number one, the hospital wasn't the safest place for me given the level of infection around, because I live in New York. And then number two, like I was afraid of how care was going to be triaged, from me to somebody else. And like these were real fears that people were living with, and like questions that people were asking of themselves, and how they were appreciated and valued in the world in real time. And like that's not something that anybody should have to live with or try to navigate their lives around.
I mean, they were talking about even taking away people's personally owned ventilators to give to others who were
I wrote an article about
Oh, did
that.
you?
I did, yeah. So it's called "Not My Ventilator." It's published in the Journal of Global Social Policy about New York State's policy. It's triaging policy for ventilators. This was crafted during the H1N1 epidemic, with, I guess, the hope and the expectation maybe that it would never actually have to be implemented, right? So this was during like the swine flu era. And then here we were during the COVID pandemic. And yeah, that was how the policy was crafted, that if somebody had a ventilator, it could be triaged to somebody else who had a better chance of surviving, based on, a series of metrics. Ultimately, during the pandemic, they said, oh, that wasn't really what we meant, and the kinds of ventilators that people use in their homes are not the same kind of ventilators that we were talking about. We were talking about ICU ventilators that have all of the metrics. But I remember being just terrified. Like I was thinking about people coming and breaking into my house and like looking to steal my ventilator. Like that was the level of fear that I had. Like I didn't even want to go out on the driveway during the early days of the pandemic, for fear, number one, of contracting COVID, and number two of like, what would happen if, I got sick and needed to go to the hospital, what kind of care I might get. And I'm sure that was an unfair fear for me to have, right? I know that I have physicians who care deeply for me, and I know I don't want to erode that in any way, but those were real legitimate fears that people were having. And I think that was really very unfortunate for such a troubling time, such a terrifying time for so many.
Out of the many things that Dr. Ellison wrote about, one sticks out: hope. She wrote a lot about hope and how it is action-oriented. Here, she talks about this work and how she thinks about hope in general.
So, my work in the field of hope is deeply ingrained into who I am, right? So, and it's only grown over the years. So my first kind of entree into this psychological idea and construct was when I was an undergraduate in college. I was on this honors track on this new program at Harvard at the time. It was called the Mind-Brain Behavior Program, or the Cognitive Neuroscience Program. So it was a joint program, at least the one that I was in, between psychology and biology. And because it was an honors-only track, all students who were involved in it had to do an undergraduate thesis. And I kind of tossed and turned, or tossed some different ideas around about what I wanted to study, and thinking about my own life, the kinds of things that were important to me. I came upon the kind of the construct of hope and how it intersects with our ability to be resilient. And I wanted to study that in people who had undergone traumas in their lives, adolescents who had undergone traumas in their lives, and in the work that I had done, in the research I had done, I was understanding hope to not just be like things that we wish for or this kind of amorphous concept, but I wanted to give it some teeth, right? To give it some kind of measurable components, right? A way to operationalize it, right? Like from social science perspectives, right? A way to actually measure it. And in that work, I came to understand hope as not just being right the things that we are wishing for or the things that are aspirational and the kind of fluffy things, but actually how we learn to view difficulties in our lives, view challenge in our lives, accept them, and then find a way to work around them to get to where we need to go, or to work with them even to get to go where we need to go, right? So hope, as I understand it, is a willful understanding of the challenges that we face and the setting of goals and the kind of the deriving of the sources of strength and allyship and comfort and support around us to get to where we need to go, right? So it's not just ignoring things. It's not just pie in the sky, Pollyanna, oh, things are just fine. It's actually a construct that's born out of the challenges that we face, a willingness to understand them and to find a will to go on with them in our lives, not despite them, but often because of them. And that has been really crucial to who I am and how I've lived my life really for all of these years, right? When you live with disability, as I'm sure you know, you experience many instances where there is like this, what seems to be insurmountable obstacle in your way, you impeding where you want to get to, and it's like, what do I do now? Do I just let it impede me forever? Do I just view it as an irreconcilable challenge in my life that I'm not going to be able to live my life because of, or do I try to understand that it's there and live with it and try to find a way to make my life meaningful nonetheless? And that's how I understand hope, that it is this action-oriented, right? It's built out of a self-perpetuating desire to set goals for oneself and find a way to achieve those goals, even as incremental as they may be, right? Even if it's just getting out of bed on, day 1, day 2, day 3, and finding a sense of purpose in your life, right? It becomes self-fulfilling. It becomes like a snowball that builds upon itself, and like that. So to just be getting out of the hospital, number one, was like goal, the important goal that I needed to first try to reach, and then returning to school like that. After my accident, after I awoke from the coma that I was in for 36 hours, that was priority number one when I awoke, that I wanted to return to school. Like, even knowing that I had undergone this catastrophic event and I didn't know where I was, I didn't really know what had happened, I couldn't move my body, I couldn't breathe, like that was really a central priority of mine. And then making that actually happen, despite the difficulty that it took for that decision to ultimately be made and that goal to actually be achieved, like that was critical to how I've been able to live my life ever since, right? It was like, it becomes almost infectious, right? It becomes almost like how you identify yourself as a fighter, as somebody who can understand challenges that we live our lives with and decide to work around or work with. And that's how I understand hope, as that way of viewing the world, that perspective that comes out of living with challenge, right? It doesn't come out of living life smoothly. It doesn't come out of, an absence of challenge. It comes out of the existence of it.
It's not just something that is given to you, it's something that you can create for yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. It's something that I think a lot of us have to create for ourselves. Right? It's not something that's bestowed really from on high. There are, I would imagine, like certain predispositions that would make certain people more adaptive, more able to accommodate changes and challenges in their lives. But a lot of it is learned. A lot of it is who you surround yourself by and the kinds of people you welcome into your life, and the support and love that you're willing to accept, the support and love you're willing to give others. Like, I really think that there is this bidirectionality and mutual creation of hope in each other's lives. And I think it's important to receive it and to offer it.
That speaks also to something that you talk about, is the benefits of interdependence and how they contrast sharply with American ideals of independence and bootstrapping and all of that stuff.
Exactly.
And realizing that disabled people can be relied upon, or can be a part of somebody's life in a way that other people are dependent on them, not just that we're dependent on them. For example, in my family, I rely on my wife for certain things, but she relies on me for certain things. And we're capable, disabled people are capable of being or playing that role in the lives of individuals or in the lives of institutions. Interdependence, I think, is the key, right, Brooke?
Oh, I couldn't agree more strongly than I do. Absolutely. I think that's so important and so wise, right? So I think one of the reasons why people with disabilities are sometimes looked down upon is because there is this dependence, right? That they lack some of the independence that other people have, right? Oh, they must be weak. Oh, they're not capable to live their lives on their own. And that is the case for all of us, right? That is the case for every single one of us. Anybody who says that they're living their lives in total isolation, or gets to where they need to go in life, or wants to go in life purely on their own volition, like, they're missing the boat completely. I wouldn't want to be one of those people, honestly, who is completely self-reliant in all situations and doesn't understand the impact that other people have on their lives. Like, that is devoid of a lot of meaning, I think, and that's not how I want to live, at all. And it's interesting. So a number of years ago, we're having a retirement party for my father, and a number of my friends were there, and my best friend who lived up in Massachusetts at the time. Now he lives in Washington, D.C. He was there and kind of was just standing next to me. And one of my cousins came up to him and said, "Oh, you're such a good friend." Like, you said to him, almost like, you're such a good friend for, like, being a friend of this person with a disability right there. That was like that was the tone that it gave. He was just standing there, and he is a great friend. So I'd like, don't misunderstand me at all. He's my best friend. I love him dearly. But then he said, well, so's Brooke, right? Like, and he was just like such an honest, like, flattening response to what my cousin had said, right? Like, there is bidirectionality and reciprocity in everybody's relationships, and I think that's particularly the case for people with disabilities who understand the value of that involvement in their lives.
Yeah, I mean, I think those people who talk about their success in the context of independence and bootstrapping are either forgetting some of the facts or misrepresenting themselves
Sure.
as being more independent than they have been.
Mm-hmm.
It's really unfortunate.
We end with Dr. Ellison sharing her words to anyone with a disability hoping to enter academia, higher education, or medicine.
Oh gosh, we need you. We need you, right? So, like, your future in these fields is, you should consider it less an opportunity for you, and more an opportunity for the fields themselves, right? That we are all better off, but with your inclusion and your involvement in the work and the thought that needs to be done, right? Like, that we are in a critical time when we need to be thinking about all the world's challenges and experiences right now in much different ways, in much broader ways, much more integrated and complex ways. And we need your thoughts. We need your brilliance. We need your ways of viewing the world. So do it. Like, do it. Don't let predispositions about disability limit what you believe in yourself. Be an advocate for yourself, however much you need to. Rely on the people around you, kind of find the allies who can help you shoulder the work that needs to be done, and know that your contributions are important to how the world is going to continue to operate, that you are valuable, you are worthy, you are worth it, and yeah, just do it.
Just do it. I think I've heard that before.
Yeah, I know. I feel as I was saying that, I was like, oh my God, don't be that cliche, but
hey, it's a great phrase. Kudos to Nike.
Right, I guess.
Just do it.
This is how we do better, right? Making sure that there is many opportunities and platforms for these kinds of conversations to be had as we possibly can make. Like, that's how we do better. Making sure that people listen and take this seriously. That's how we do better. So we're all a part of that. And I want to thank you for welcoming me today to talk about this, myself, which is my favorite topic.
We express our heartfelt gratitude to the late Dr. Brooke Ellison for generously sharing her remarkable journey. It was a profound honor to commemorate her life and contributions. Dr. Ellison's enduring legacy, dedicated to education and inspiration, lives on. We urge you to explore her impactful memoir, Look Both Ways, as a timeless source of motivation for individuals with disabilities aspiring to contribute to the field of science. This podcast is a production of the Docs with Disabilities Initiative and is supported in part by the University of Michigan Medical School Department of Family Medicine M Disability Initiative, the Stanford Medicine Alliance for Disability Inclusion and Equity, and the Ford Foundation. The opinions on this podcast do not necessarily reflect those of the hosts, their respective institutions, or the funders. This podcast is released under Creative Commons Attribution, Non-Commercial, Non-Derivative License. This episode was produced by Lisa Meeks, Jasmine Lopez, and Ari Natovich. Thank you so much!